Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to the MVS Proseminar, which we present speakers to our graduate students who are all their own huddle over there, so it's that crew over there. But it's a great pleasure to offer this project, what we're going to see today, a film and a talk, in conjunction with, in partnership with the power plant. Thanks very much to the power plant for bringing us this speaker. And I just wanted to acknowledge that we are on the territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit and the ancestral land of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat. This is a dish with one spoon territory. It was a treaty between the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and to protect the land. Subsequent indigenous nations have lived on this land and continue to live on this land, as do Europeans and other settlers, and we have been all made welcome and invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. And Josh, I would like to bring you up. Did I say? My name is Lisa Steele. I'm with Visual Studies.
Great, thank you. Great, well, thank you so much, Lisa. And good afternoon to everyone. My name is Josh Heumann. I'm the Curator of Education and Public Programs at the Power Plant Contemporary Art Gallery. I hope some of you were able to attend yesterday's opening party. Our fall exhibitions have opened. And hopefully you saw the exhibition La Canicula, featuring Vivian Suter's paintings and her mother, Elisabeth Wilde's collages. If not, those exhibitions, including Vivian's and Elisabeth Wilde's, will remain on view at the power plant through December 30th. Of course, we're pleased to be here at the University of Toronto's John H. Daniels Faculty of Architecture, Landscape, and Design to co-present this program with the Master of Visual Studies Proseminar series. So special thanks go, of course, to Charles Stankovich, Director of Visual Studies, and Lisa for her collaborative efforts. As you'll learn, Vivian Suter's work is something of an organic collaboration too. She begins with marks on the canvas inspired by her remarkable natural setting in rural Guatemala, and then exposes those canvases to the natural elements, to the rain, the mud, the insects, even avocados and mangoes that drop from the trees onto the canvases. And so the installation of Suter's work at the power plant is a collaboration as well. Key staff have included Gaetan Verna, our director, Nabila Abdelnabi, our assistant curator, Paul Zingroni, our head of registration, installation, and facilities, in close collaboration and conversation with Vivian Suter herself, with Elisabeth Wilde, and with today's speaker, Stefan Benchoam. I'm also fortunate to work with a small team of educators dedicated to creating programs like this, including Kendra Campbell, our TD Curator of Education and Outreach Fellow. The exhibition is made possible thanks to many generous donors, including our presenting donor, the Kerner Foundation, an anonymous supporting donor, Nancy Jane, Heuristica Discovery Council, and the additional support of Gaga Mexico City and Los Angeles, Gladstone Gallery, Karma International, and Stampa. And of course, the power plant is a fortunate recipient of funding from all three levels of government funding here in Canada, the Canada Council for the Arts, the Ontario Arts Council, and the Toronto Arts Council. And for those of you who have visited the power plant or will visit the power plant, we charge no admission thanks to BMO and our all-year, all-free admission policy. So thinking about today's program specifically, we'll begin with a screening of a documentary directed by Rosalind Nashashibi entitled Vivian's Garden, about Suter and her mother, Elisabeth, taking a close and dreamy look at their artistic, emotional, and economic lives. Following the film, our speaker, Stefan Benchoam, who is familiar with both Vivian and Elisabeth, will speak. He is an artist, an independent curator, and co-founder of both Proyectos Ultravioleta, a contemporary art space based in Guatemala City, and NUMU, the Nuevo Museo de Arte Contemporáneo, Guatemala's first and only, and the world's smallest contemporary art museum. And as the program nears its conclusion, we'll take some questions from you, our audience. So let's get started with the film, and then Stefan will hop on stage. Thank you.
Hi everyone. First off, I'd like to start by saying a bunch of thank yous, so bear with me. I would first like to thank Salma Tukan, who first spoke about my practice to Nabila. This was a couple of years ago, and that facilitated a conversation with her and with Carolyn, which led to where we are now. In that conversation, we spoke about Vivian and Elisabeth's practice, that in a way sparked some of their interest, and they had a chance to experience the work in the Documenta 14 in both Athens and Kassel. And through that, Nabila and Gaetan came to Guatemala. And so thanks to all of you, and also thanks to the incredible Power Plant team for putting together such a wonderful exhibition. For those of you that were there last night, I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. For those of you that haven't been there, I urge you to go and experience the work. And thank you all as well for being here on a Saturday afternoon. Also, last thank you is to Rosalind Nashashibi for that film that we just saw. It's really a great way to contextualize the complexities around the practices of both Vivian and Elisabeth in Guatemala. And so with all of those thank yous, I'd like to share with you a little bit of context into their practice and to Guatemala as a whole. And rather than specify and delve into the technical aspects of the work per se, given that you can actually experience the work through the way that it's meant to be taken in, which is through your senses at the power plant, I would more so like to talk about, in a way, their story and their history, and the story of displacement, about art, about adaptation, about love, and many, many other things. I'd like to start off by saying that both Vivian and Elisabeth actually come from a family of female artists. It's Elisabeth's grandmother, who was an artist in her own right. That would be Vivian's great-grandmother. And so it's a family that has a very incredible vein and sensitivity towards the arts and towards life itself. Their story, or Elisabeth's story, really starts in Vienna in 1922. She was born to a Jewish family back at the time. Her father was a merchant who traveled all around Europe at the time, and through those travels really was able to expose himself to the political climate of the times. With that, in 1939, he took a decision to leave Vienna to escape from the rise of Nazism, which was coming around at the time. And just to give you a sense of how that actually took place, they were in Vienna, happened to go to Yugoslavia. From Yugoslavia, they went to Italy. And I point this out because there's a beautiful anecdote about their escape. As they were leaving, it was Elisabeth's parents that said to her that they couldn't leave Europe, which at the time, of course, there was a lot of uncertainty around the trip, without seeing Venice and seeing that real wonder, as they didn't know if they were ever able to be coming back. And so it just speaks volumes of how they are and how they appreciate life and culture and history altogether, that under such dire circumstances, they went there, spent a couple of nights to then go through Switzerland, France, Belgium, into the Netherlands, and catch the very last cargo boat that was leaving to Buenos Aires at the time. Just to say that it wasn't easy even being at that port. They had to plead to the captain of the ship, who later agreed to take them upon in that journey to Buenos Aires. They managed to narrowly escape some of the atrocities that later occurred in Europe, and arrived there in 1939. At this time, Elisabeth was a young artist in her own right. She had been taking art courses, private art courses in Vienna, and as soon as she arrived, she enrolled in art school or the Arts Academy there. Up here you can see a couple of images of Elisabeth painting while she was there. Elisabeth really sought to connect with different artists at the time, and she had her first shows in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, at the Fine Arts Institute. She was always very curious and also very intelligent with her hands, and so through her life she's actually delved into different types of work. One of them was textile design. And I say this with a lot of importance because it was her interest in textile making that took her to a textiles factory, where she then met who would be her husband and the father of Vivian. Vivian was born in 1949. Her father, August Wild, or August Wild, was a Swiss industrialist living in Argentina at the time. He was doing very good for himself, and it was in the mid-50s, more or less, when Perón came into power, that Perón started to nationalize a lot of different companies. August, being as stubborn and also as strong in his postures as apparently he was, he decided that nobody was going to take away his factory. And so, as such, what he decided to do in the early 60s was actually sell it off, pack his things and the family's things, and with Elisabeth and with Vivian, move over to Basel. Just to give you a sense of other things that Elisabeth has done throughout her life, I gathered a bunch of images from different trips that I've done to their house and photographs I've taken with my iPhone, so excuse the imperfect shots, but it's really to give you a sense of what she does. These are some of her prints that she's done over the years, some of her drawings and pattern making, some of her painting as well. And lastly, even though she's also done chandeliers, she's done jewelry, she's done sculpture, I want to leave you with these ceramics, which I know are Vivian's favorites. So they essentially arrived to Basel in 1962, and Elisabeth, at the time, she decides to set up an antique shop. This gives her the possibility to travel through Europe and collect a series of different objects that she would later resell and have some sense of stability within her life. Vivian, when she first arrives to Switzerland, she's 13 and, according to her, has a very hard time adapting in a way. However, she knows from a very early stage that she wants to be an artist herself and follow along the footsteps of her mother and grandmother. And so she starts to work very prolifically in art school. She has a chance and an opportunity to travel through Africa and through parts of Asia, and then coming back as a young artist, she actually has her first major break, which is a solo show in 1974 at Gallery Stampa. This I mention and I make a note of to say that it is very groundbreaking in a sense that such a young artist at the time, who then was 24 years old, would have a solo show, not to say a young female artist at the time. It's not as if it's now where it seems artists are having solo shows since they're 12 or 13 years old, but rather this was quite unlikely then. Then Vivian starts to get a lot of attention and a lot of recognition in her practice. This is Vivian setting up a show that she participated in 1981 at the Kunsthalle Basel. This was a show that was curated by Jean-Christophe Amann, and it was titled The Six Young Artists of Basel. As you can see at the time, she's already experimenting quite a lot with painting. These themselves are actually works on paper, not on canvas, but it just shows her spirit of experimentation and discovery in her work altogether. These are some more images of those paintings on paper that she did. In 1982, Vivian seems to be getting a lot of attention an attention that creates a specific tension within her own practice, because it's also bringing in ushering in a lot of other issues around her and her ability to actually make art. This is a special type of attention that she likes to, or she didn't want to be involved with, and so she shied away from. She didn't know how to handle the early fame and recognition that she was dealing with and having to work with, and so she takes a one-way ticket to Los Angeles to visit a friend of hers as a way to try to escape that. When she first arrives in LA, she realizes she actually doesn't like Los Angeles in the early 80s. And so, given her spirit of adventure and her curiosity for the world, she decides to backpack through Latin America. She goes through Mexico and arrives in Guatemala in 1982 in Lake Atitlan. As you can see in the images, this is a really breathtaking lake. It's a lake which, according to geologists, the lake itself is a crater of a mega volcano, which exploded over 200 million years ago, and through that explosion created all the Central American Isthmus. Vivian was fascinated with this place, and as soon as she arrived, she knew she wanted to stay. And so she essentially set up a studio and actually fell in love herself. There it was where she married and had her son, Panchito. And in that process also, together with the support of her mother, they acquired a part of an old coffee plantation where she's now set up her studios and also her house. This to say too that coincidentally 1982, 83, and 84 were some of the most difficult years in Guatemala's very convoluted history. Just to contextualize Guatemala itself, this is a country that was the heart of the Mayan civilization for thousands of years. In the 1500s, the Spaniards saw a lot of resources there, and so they established a capital over there, one of the major capitals of their colony in the Americas, in Antigua. And then it was in the mid-20th century that there was a US-led coup. This was the second coup of the Cold War. This was 1954. First one, of course, occurred in Tehran, in Iran, and the second one was in Guatemala. This led to a very long, difficult, and gruesome civil war, which unofficially, as I said, started in 1954, officially in 1960, and which cost the country over 200,000 murders and forced disappearances. This to say that it was a country, at the time, a very small population altogether, and with that also came a massive brain drain. This brought many artists, thinkers, activists, anybody who was somewhat critical of the governmental forces to either be killed, be disappeared, be displaced, or having to, in a way, self-censor themselves as means of survival. So this is the Guatemala that Vivian found herself in at the time, but yet something about the place really made her stay there altogether. Moving on with their story, it's at the meantime, while Vivian is already in Guatemala, Elisabeth starts to come to Guatemala more and more often to spend some time with Vivian and also with her grandson, Panchito. And it's in 1997, at 75 years of age, that she decides that she will retire, thus closing off her shop in Basel and moving to Guatemala. Luckily for them, they found a plot of land right next to Vivian's that was for sale, which they bought, and that's where Elisabeth set up her own house and also her studio. Moving on a few years later, Elisabeth, in 2003, so 15 years ago, she had a very difficult mishap. She actually fell and broke her hip, and as you got a sense, I guess, in Rosalind's film, Elisabeth, she's really a true matriarch. She's a force to be reckoned with in her own right. And I mention this because Vivian was traveling with Panchito at the time, and Elisabeth put a very stern warning to her not to return to Guatemala to help her, but rather to stay in Europe with Panchito and prioritize that, saying that she would actually look out after herself, which she did in a, you could say, unorthodox way. Rather than going to a Western doctor, what she decided she would do for treatment is actually to go to a Mayan healer, which took away her pain, which is a great thing, but also took away her ability to walk. And so since, for the last 15 years, she's actually been confined to a wheelchair. And I mention all of this because it's through this new restraint that she's found in the last 15 years that she's focused on her collage making, which is a daily practice in her own right. I always like to make a parallel which compares her adapting to life and to the difficulties of it with Matisse. Matisse, of course, at the later stage of his career, he started to do the cutouts from his hospital bed. Matisse, too, was very engrossed in himself and in his huge male ego, competing with Picasso to see who had the biggest paintings and the biggest careers. And so it's why he went so big in a way. And I mentioned this in contrast to Elisabeth, who rather than seeking to demonstrate anything to anybody at all, she really started to work for herself. These collages, it's a space for meditation for her. And the collages that she makes, they're universes in their own right. They're very intimate, they're very jewel-like. And it's something that she does on a daily practice, on a day-to-day. As you saw in the film, which I have to confess, it's also the only time that I've seen her working. What she does is that she cuts out all these different forms or things that she's interested in from magazines, and then she lays them down where she thinks that they fit and feel right. Then she'll actually go to bed and the next morning wake up, and one of the first things that she'll do with her fresh eyes is go back to the work itself, see if it makes sense where she left them behind, and if so, glue them down to the paper itself. 2003, which is a year where Elisabeth had this accident, is also a year where Adam Szymczyk was appointed the director and chief creator of the Kunsthalle Basel. I know it might all sound a bit random why I'm mentioning this within their narrative, but I hope that everything will come together very soon. 2005, 2 years later, there's a really massive hurricane, Hurricane Stan, that floods Guatemala, and with that floods Vivian's studio. As for Vivian herself, she has two studios, one which is perched upon the mountain above the canopies where she paints. Imagine a cabin really about 30 meters above the level of the ground where she dances with the paint. Of course, her canvases are very physical and they're very emotional. All of her work, like Elisabeth's, is very intuitive, and it's a way where she connects and, in a spiritual way, like really tries to get to something special and something new and something different. In this process, what she does is that she'll paint over a stretcher, and then once she's completed the painting itself, as you saw in Rosie's film, she'll then take the stretcher down to her other studio, which is at lake level. She'll then stretch the canvases there and then hang them. Similarly, actually, to the central piece of the exhibition, La Canícula at the power plant, you see a rack with several paintings hung. That's mimicking the way that she hangs paintings in her studio itself. And I mention this because when the studio got flooded in 2005, a lot of the paintings were absolutely soiled. Of course, at the beginning, Vivian had a breakdown, you could say. She, from what she's told me, at the beginning was questioning everything. The fact that she took a very decisive step to leave the accolade in Basel and really go to Guatemala, follow her instincts, follow her heart, and try to get to something new and unique. And then realizing that maybe, quite possibly, all of it had gone down the drain with this flood. Of course, after pondering over it for a very long time and meditating over it, she realized that this was, in a way, a blessing in disguise. She had an epiphany of sorts. which is to say that she realized that she had been painting nature for such a long time, and now it was nature that was coming in to paint her works with her. Since 2005, she actively started to collaborate with nature itself. And so now if you walk to the studio and the garden, which is a garden that she's been cultivating for the last 35 years since she's been there, you'll see canvases laid down on the ground underneath the mango trees, underneath the papayas, underneath the avocados, placed in certain ways where when the rainfall comes down and really hits, which is a really deep and intense rain, some of the mud and water will splatter over the canvases and allowing all of these things and forces to actually take place within the canvas itself. Later, 2010, we had another major tropical storm. This was Agatha. And with that, it was another moment where she pushed herself to experiment with these forces altogether. Going back to Adam, who I mentioned earlier, he was appointed, as I said, the chief curator and director of the Kunsthalle Basel. And the reason why I mentioned that is because he went through the archives and found the images and information on the show that Jean-Christophe Amann had curated in 1981, which was titled The Six Young Artists from Basel. That show included artists, Vivian, of course, and Miriam Kahn and Ruth Hemmelsbach, amongst others. And what was curious with Adam is that he knew who 5 of those artists were, but really had no idea who Vivian was. Also, another anecdote within that is that Adam's mother, she was a teacher, and she, from a very early age, started to buy books to Adam, who was an avid reader since he was a child. Specifically, through conversations, he's mentioned that he was fascinated by magical realism of Latin America and the Latin American boom. And I mention all of this to say that, of course, when he realized that there was this artist who was working in between volcanoes in Guatemala, everything, like, all the alarms went off for him. As such, he decided to do a show titled The Six Young Artists of Basel ×2, where he invited the first original set to participate in that show, and then including some of the original works, and then a younger set of artists too. That really, and I'm gonna forward 2 images of that. There are some of the images of that show itself, but that really led to very strong interest, friendship, and collaboration between Adam and Vivian. So much so that in 2013, Adam was invited to curate a show at the Museo Tamayo in Mexico City. It was a show titled Polinka, or Where the Sound is Created, and it was a show that included Vivian's works. Here you can see one of those racks themselves, and you can see a certain mud line. That's actually the mud and how it reached the paintings with that first flood in 2005. In that show too, Elisabeth actually participated. In later conversations that I had with Adam, I asked him how he came across the work, and he said that actually it was through Vivian, and Vivian telling him about the collages, and that Vivian had said that the collages were really, really good. Adam invited Elisabeth to participate in the show without having seen any of the collages themselves. And he said that if Vivian was saying that they were good, that they were probably excellent. And such is the case. I mention all of this because this is also the very first place where I encountered their work. I happened to be in Mexico City at the time, and I went to the show, and I was very fascinated by it altogether, and also very confused, I must confess. I pride myself in doing a lot of research on what's happening locally in Guatemala and what the different artists are doing. And I was very dumbfounded in realizing all these references to Guatemala with these 2 names, Vivian Suter and Elisabeth, who I couldn't recognize at all. Luckily, a couple of weeks later, Fernando Mesa from Gaga Gallery in Mexico City happened to be coming to Guatemala to visit Vivian. They had met in the opening of the show and really got on. And when Fernando and Pepe came over to Guatemala, together with Emiliano Valdez, who was the co-director of Proyectos Ultravioleta at the time, we had an informal, friendly dinner with them. They told us more about their visit that they were going to conduct in a couple of days. to Vivian and Elisabeth's studio. And then a couple of days later, afterwards, when they came out of the studio, they called us and said, "You guys, it's really special what they have. You have to visit. You have to go." And so I know I said I would say no more thank yous. I lied. Thank you to Fernando for facilitating that introduction. This collaboration, friendship that developed again with Adam and Vivian and Elisabeth brought them to another show, which Adam, I believe, was his last show at the Kunsthalle Basel before being appointed the director of the following Documenta, the Documenta 14. And it's a show that they did together. It was a solo show of both of their works there. And so these are a few of those images from that exhibition. Since then, it's fair to say that Vivian's work has gotten a lot of exposure. She was also part of the 31st Sao Paulo Biennial in 2014, and of course in the Documenta in both Athens and Kassel last year in 2017. And so, timeline, having gone through the timeline and having gotten through that, I actually wanted to read a text that I wrote last year on the occasion of the Documenta. I was invited by Moose Magazine to write about both Vivian and Elisabeth's practices, which I did through quite an unusual or unorthodox text, which I want to share with you because it helps contextualize their practice altogether and also their practice being set in Guatemala. 7:30 a.m. The alarm goes off. It's Saturday, and the day is overcast. Turn on the kettle, news, Facebook, Instagram. Brew a morning cup of coffee to start the day. Answer a few emails, shower, grab some magazines, out the door. 8:32 a.m. Start the car, start the drive. Immediately, I'm hit with heavy traffic. People honking their horns and utter chaos. The mood in Guatemala City is very heavy. Only a few days ago, another national tragedy occurred due to governmental negligence. This time, 38 young teenage girls tragically died due to a fire that consumed them in a governmental shelter for youth, ironically called Hogar Seguro, safe house. They were locked inside as fire ripped through. The directors of the shelter knew about it and did nothing. The directors of the country's welfare program knew about it and did nothing. And as it turns out, the president knew about it and did nothing. Nothing at all. We're all struggling to get back on our feet. 8:53 a.m. I reached the Pan American Highway, a truly ambitious undertaking, a road that would stretch throughout all of America, from Alaska in the north to Ushuaia, Argentina in the south. 30,000 kilometers of uninterrupted highways, except of course for the Darien Gap, a 160 kilometer stretch of rainforest between Panama and Colombia, creating a forced rupture between Central and South America. 9:01 a.m. in the Pan American Highway, heading north, officially outside of Guatemala City. 9:35 a.m. Chimaltenango, the city with the highest HIV and STI rates in Guatemala. Brothels, fried chicken stands, and car part shops line the highway, a type of black hole where traffic abounds, bumper to bumper, at 5 kilometers per hour. I roll down the window and hear from the radio system of the car that is also stuck in traffic but slowly headed the opposite way, that the number has risen to 39. 39 young teenage girls burnt alive due to governmental negligence. An absolute tragedy. 10:20 a.m. An obligatory stop at Cabaña Don Robert, a wooden cabin in the highlands for fresh mango juice and a jar of their homemade orange jam, Elisabeth's favorite. 17 minutes later, I'm back on the road again. 11:03 a.m. There's a makeshift flower stand at the side of the road, all freshly cut. How much for a handful of the yellow ones? I ask and I point out to the ones I like. 15 quetzales, she responds. And the white ones next to those? Same price for you, she responds in her broken Spanish. I take one of each. 11:17 a.m. I reach Solola. It's market day. Beautiful textiles everywhere. Traffic is slow. From a distance comes a banged-up silver pickup truck with a loudspeaker connected to its roof. Inside, a woman calls for people to show their indignation and to join her and others at the town's central square to protest. Guatemala llora sangre. Guatemala weeps blood, she says. 11:35 a.m. As I drive down the winding road down to Panajachel, tucked in between Volcán Atitlan, Volcán San Pedro, and Volcán Toliman, I catch my first glimpse of Lake Atitlan. The sun is out, and the view never ceases to amaze. In his 1934 travel book, Beyond the Mexique Bay, Aldous Huxley writes, Lake Como, it seems to me, touches on the limit of permissively picturesque, but Atitlan is Como with additional embellishments of several immense volcanoes. It really is too much of a good thing. Alexander von Humboldt famously described it as the most beautiful lake in the world. 11:57 a.m. I slowly drive over to the empty lot just a few houses away from Vivian and Elisabeth's. I greet the lady sitting next door. I explain that I'm coming to visit them and ask if I can park there. A friend of Vivian's is a friend of mine. Park wherever you like, she yells back. I get out the car, I get the magazines, the jam, the flowers. I lock the car and start walking down the path to their homes and reach the Finquita Panchito, hand-painted wooden sign that's been carefully placed above the gray stone wall and green wooden door. It's 12:02 p.m. when I ring the bell. I hear a storm of dogs running over to greet me. Soon enough, the door opens into her majestic garden, and it's Vivian who first greets me with her usual warmth. And Tintin, Bonso, Flor, and Sophie, jumping and rolling about in excitement. Time exists differently here. We walk down the dirt path, and there's all sorts of greenery around us, pure exuberance. Areca palms, royal palms, banana palms, fishtail palms, bougainvillea, in a variety of colors, pine trees, ficus, eucalyptus, gravileas, monstera deliciosas, spineless yuccas, bamboo, birds of paradise, ceiba trees, Justicia brandighinas, macadamias, lemon trees, lime trees, tangerine trees, papaya trees, mango trees, avocado trees, maidenhair ferns, Boston ferns, tangerine trees, papaya trees, again, more mango trees, bird's nest ferns, cinnamon ferns, Australian tree ferns, ostrich ferns, adiantum ferns, and coffee plants. Lots of coffee plants everywhere, as this was a coffee farm before they arrived. Further down, in a brick path that connects her house and her studio to Vivian's house, is Elisabeth. She has recently turned 95 and is as radiant as ever. Vivian hands her the flowers and gets behind her mother's chair, pushing her down the ramp to her home where the smell of a freshly cooked meal awaits. I follow behind them. We go in through the kitchen where various warm pans sit on the stove and into Vivian's living room. From the roof hangs a mirrored disco ball and a chandelier that Elisabeth made in the 70s using bits and pieces from old chandeliers. She had her own antique shop in Basel. On the walls there are artworks by Vivian, Elisabeth, and Panchito, Vivian's son, most of which he created when he was very young. There's also works by some of their artist friends and also a couple of antique paintings that have been with them since Basel. In the center of the living room is a chimney, and in front of it, 2 couches covered with local hand-woven textiles. And there are more plants, 4 potted palms that have found their way into the interior of the house. I help Elisabeth out to the patio, and we sit underneath a canopy of a huge matapalo, next to the way that leads up to the mountain to one of Vivian's studios. There is a swing hanging from the tree. Vivian runs to the kitchen, and Elisabeth explains that this tree was ultimately what convinced them to buy that property in the 80s. Vivian comes back from the kitchen with a bottle of red, a bottle of white, and 3 empty glasses. We pour wine into our glasses, raise them, and cheer. As we serve a second glass, Elisabeth reminds us that it's time for lunch. We go back into Vivian's living room, and now to the terrace that offers another stunning view of their tropical garden. Elisabeth and I take our places, and Vivian makes several trips to the kitchen, returning with a variety of dishes. Tomato and red radish salad, diced carrot, rice, meat and onion stuffed zucchini, guacamole, broccoli, meatballs, and Vivian's freshly made chiltepe chilito. Conversation and more why accompany our meal, and after seconds, it's time for coffee and desserts. Vanilla ice cream with homemade strawberry sauce. Soon after our meal is over, Vivian leads Elisabeth back to her studio and invites me to go up to her studio to see her most recent paintings. A good 30 meters up, perched on the side of the mountain, is a single-room wooden cabin with an expansive balcony hovering above the tree canopy. A few meters before reaching the studio, we stumble across a number of paint buckets, jars, and brushes on the floors. Leaning on the exterior of the walls of her studio, I see a large stretched abstract canvas with bright green, blue, and red color fields, and splatters of mud and leaves that have fallen on as she has been working on it. We walk through dozens, if not hundreds, of paint jars and buckets scattered across the balcony floor and into the studio itself, where more containers lay everywhere and 4 paintings greet us with their bright colors and organic forms. This is a place of work, a place of meditation where Vivian has been dancing with nature and with her emotions on a daily basis for more than 30 years, and translating that experience into her large-scale work. She has done this by disconnecting from the world around her and connecting with the world within her, pushing her painting practice forward, physically, mentally, and spiritually. She always works in the present, with little regard to the future, committed to her process, to change, to chance, and even open to misfortune in the form of natural disasters. After Hurricane Stan and Agatha flooded the lake and her second studio at lake level, soiling most of her unstretched paintings of the last decades, she embraced nature further, even collaborating with it. The sun starts to set and rain clouds loom on the horizon. We descend down the mountain and head to Elisabeth's studio. On the way, underneath a mango tree, is a large half-painted canvas that has been placed flat on the ground, face up. A few mangoes have fallen on it. We reach Elisabeth and find her, scissors in hand, working on her desk. Excitedly, she asks Vivian to reach for a folder with about 90 collages made of magazine cutouts, all from this year. She pulls them out and we start laying them on the dinner table. They are small, colorful, and very carefully constructed. Yet, what's most striking is the variety amongst them and her bold sense of composition. Some are surreal and very loose, others more structured and architectural. They're all small gems, all of them, paintings in their own right. These are stunning, I tell her, as Vivian nods her head in agreement. They're just collages, she quickly answers back with a smile. Outside, it's already dark. The wind brushes through the trees above, and the stars come out by the dozen. Bonzo howls at the moon, and slowly, drop by drop, the plants, the trees, and everything that surrounds us disappears into the rain. Lastly, before opening up to a few questions, I just want to close off by reading yet another thing. This is a text a small poem actually, that Vivian wrote on the occasion of her exhibition at the Kunsthalle Basel in 1981, which in a way filters her voice and accompanies Bonzo, my man, up there. This is called "The Sun is Far Away." Come over me, come. The rain will drown us. The mountains will fall over us. The sun is far away. The basket chair I'm sitting on will float away. The cushion, my pillow, will be soaked with heavy dreams. The damp through the wall will take care of the green. I see a little yellow light, a taxi through the light, bringing many goodies. Thank you.
So are there any questions out there?
One at a time.
Excellent.
Thank you for a beautiful In the film, when Elisabeth is talking off camera to Vivian, they're talking about something that happened, and there were some aggressive people, and then, or maybe it was a dog, and then someone whose body was never found. Do you know that story?
Thanks for the question, especially because it lays more of this context that is Guatemala. As beautiful of a country that it is, it still has a very turbulent present. And specifically, I believe that this was a situation, and I might be confusing with other situations that have happened in that town, where there was a team of, or a group of justicieros, or people that were seeking for justice outside of the legal parameters of law, that started to go after different drug dealers in the town. They started to go after them, either murder and disappear them, or publicly lynch them. However, certain of events, and as the situation unfolded, when they eventually found people that were masked and responsible for these crimes, they realized that it was the rival drug gang that was after this. So, that in a nutshell.
Thank you.
Great. Also a question as well. So you mentioned that Vivian had this exhibition in 1981, and then found herself resettling in Guatemala. What sorts of exhibitions was she participating in between that and, we'll say, her rediscovery, perhaps, by Europeans?
Yeah, another great question. Thank you, Josh. I mean, she, as I mentioned, she started to work with Gallery Stampa a long time ago. And in that process, or in that time, in that period in between, she continued a conversation with them. However, a lot of her practice changed when she moved to Guatemala, even before the hurricanes, Stan and Mitch. Specifically, one of the things that I could point to is the fact that she wasn't able to get canvas as she would back in Switzerland. So she went to a local company and got some type of fabric that she would then sew together to make a larger type of canvas to work on. Additionally, she had a hard time sourcing paint. And so she actually, being the great artist that she is, she let these things come into the work itself. And so a lot of her paintings started to show less paint on the surfaces. They became quite bare, and also to still portray a certain raw and honest aspect to them. And I mentioned this because there's a story that she told me that when she first started to go back to Switzerland, to the gallery with those paintings, they were very confused. They thought that the paintings were not completed. And they said to her, what is this? We can't show these works. And she explained that it was actually part of the context, and it was actually part of the situations around her that had led her practice to go in this particular way. And so they reluctantly accepted the paintings at the beginning, and realized that this wasn't a one-off, but it was actually something that she was doing. And I mean, they've been there for her since they've had a relationship, and they supported her, so she would be in different group shows within the gallery, but not really so much work outside of that, to fully answer your question. And it was really through Adam Sprague, and I mention him yet again because it's to give credit where credit is due, and also to make justice to his contribution to their practices altogether, and also the fact that they have such a strong friendship and relationship that signifies a lot to both Vivian and Elisabeth.
Any other questions?
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on the relationship between particularly about Vivian and Elisabeth's journeys in terms of the studio flooding or Elisabeth's hip breaking, but also in terms of Guatemala, I think, as a land, and the choice of abstraction, or abstraction as a sort of ground in which the work is set.
That's yet another great question. I don't know if I'm going to be able to fully answer that one in terms of their own work. I think specifically Vivian, she was quite into abstraction from a very early stage in her career, even before the trauma. Yet it was something that she just decided to continue to evolve her artistic language altogether, and which was shaped by the art making itself. I guess in terms of how they resolved the drama and like stepping away from the abstraction side to it, there was just always a natural conviction that it was the work that would help them get to something. They didn't know what it was, and they really removed themselves from all the lights and really did something that they felt strong about, showing just a lot of courage and a lot of honesty within themselves to be able to do that without knowing the consequences or what would happen, and removing themselves from that early success. Funnily enough, of course, they couldn't get too far away from that, as it was something like the art world or art history in a way came and followed them all the way to Guatemala and placed them back in the center of those conversations. And then, I mean, of course, we now see where we are and what's happened to them altogether. In terms of Guatemala and the artistic practices there, art does serve as a type of catalyst to heal and to have conversations that would otherwise not happen. In terms of this artistic scene, it's important to mention that there's no support for the arts that's public and hardly any support that's private. It's a context that's very bare in those regards. There's really only one art school, the Escuela de Arte Plástica, and it's a school where it's actually kind of taboo to talk about contemporary art, believe it or not. You go there and still you see a lot of students that are chisel in hand, going at sculpture in that way. And there's just a lot of misunderstanding of what contemporary art can be. However, there is an incredible history and an incredible legacy in Guatemala, and yet again, not even a market there for art. And what that translates to is a scene that's very real and very raw and very unique. Artists there really see a true commitment to what they're doing and to opening up these spaces that allow for conversations that would otherwise not take place and for social gatherings to occur. This is again a war-torn country, and it's really through these spaces that you can see a lot of different connection that's being done in the social tissues of the country itself. And all this to say that what's been really wonderful, especially over the last maybe 5 to 10 years, is there's been a lot of artist-run spaces that have popped up, not only in Guatemala City, but all across the country itself. And with that, a very diverse and effervescent conversation, where you're getting a lot of artists coming from different backgrounds and different ethnicities, sharing a conversation through the art that they make and the art that they foster altogether. And with that, of course, healing, which is something that we're still working on, but hopefully trying to overcome in terms of the war that we had, and also to fight the present, and with that, the president and the government that we have, which, as you got a sense in the text that I read out, they're completely negligent and shameful in their proceedings.
Great. Well, thank you once again. If everyone could please give a hand to Stefan Benchoam.